His Grace Sutapa Prabhu is based in the UK. Sutapa Prabhu is going to talk to us about a very subtle topic, if I may say so. Something which is very valuable for educators to comprehend, appreciate, and work on what should be an attitude of the educator. So without further ado, I'm handing over the symposium to you, Sutapa Prabhu. Thank you for joining us.
Hare Krishna, Tapan Mishra Prabhu, and my humble obeisances to all the Vaishnavas. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. Well, it's afternoon in London, and I'm not sure where you are, but I'm very happy to be here. And yes, as Tapan Mishra Prabhu mentioned, I'll try to share something I feel very passionate about, that I feel has helped me in my humble attempts to educate in Krishna consciousness and communicate Krishna consciousness powerfully, relevantly, and in a way that's really transformative. The topic of today's presentation will be learning to hear the unheard. And I have a little PowerPoint presentation here. It's very, very simple. And I'll try to share this with you. As I speak about this, what I'd like to say is that an immediate comprehension of this, it's actually a very, very simple principle. But I feel that what we're talking about here, if we're able to deeply imbibe within our teaching, it could really take things to another level. And I'll try to share that with you today. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namaham Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada traveled the world just like any other preacher who travels the world. Srila Prabhupada was often confronted with many different questions that people had about the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And perhaps one of the most common questions that people asked him, that people ask today, and that I'm sure people will continue to ask for generations to come is, can you see God? A very, very interesting question. But I have to say, more interesting than the question is Srila Prabhupada's answer. Because if you look closely and study the corpus of Srila Prabhupada's recorded works, and not just Srila Prabhupada, the acharyas previous to him, you will see that they answered the same question in many different ways. Can you see God? Prabhupada was asked. Yes, Prabhupada said, I can see God. Can you not see God? God is available for everyone. At other times, Srila Prabhupada, when he was asked, can you see God? Srila Prabhupada said, that is not a good question. What will you get by asking that question? The better question to ask me is, Swamiji, how can I be empowered to see God? Sometimes Srila Prabhupada responded to that question by saying, yes, I've seen God, but if I tell you I've seen God, will you believe me? At other times, Srila Prabhupada reiterated the answer of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who said, don't try and see God, but act in such a way that God will want to see you. How would we respond when we're asked the question, can you see God? Srila Prabhupada replied in many, many different ways. When Srila Prabhupada replied to this question, he was definitely illuminating that there are many layers to understanding the answer to this question. But what Srila Prabhupada was specifically doing is he was hearing the unheard. The question may be, can you see God? But Srila Prabhupada, as a teacher, as a communicator, as a preacher of Krishna consciousness, was able to see beyond the immediate question and understand what was the underlying motive behind this question. And once Srila Prabhupada had been able to perceive that unheard aspect of the question, then he was able to respond appropriately, respond differently, respond in a way that would address the underlying motivations. Oftentimes we hear the voice, but have we heard the needs, the interests, the concerns, the emotions, and the blocks that someone may have, which is not necessarily voiced, which is not necessarily expressed in sound, but which is very, very much part of where they're coming from in their question. Unless we learn to hear the unheard aspects, unless we hear these subtle drivers behind people's queries, number one, we may not be able to address what they're actually looking for. And number two, we may not be able to, not only will we not be able to address the thing that they're looking for, but we may actually make things worse because we're not able to deeply understand what is the solution that they're actually looking for. So what I want to share with you today, and again, it's a very simple principle. Every teacher is taught this, perhaps in lesson 1 or 2, that you need to understand your audience. But from my own observation of my own teaching, and from my humble observation of seeing teaching in our movement, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement in this regard. I want to share a story with you of a famous king whose name was King Sao, and he had a prince. And this king, when he wanted to train his prince to be the next ruler of the kingdom, then what he did is he called the prince and he told the prince, before you become the ruler of the kingdom, what I want you to do is I want you to go away to the forest. I want you to go away to the great Mingli forest, and I want you to stay there for 1 year. And in that 1 year, what I want you to do is listen very, very carefully and then come back to me. So this prince set off for the forest, to the great Mingli forest. And there in the forest, he stood, sat, walked, and absorbed all of the sounds of the forest. And after 1 year, he came back and the king asked him, "My dear prince, as you prepare to take up rulership, let me first ask you the question. When you went to the forest and you listened for 1 year, what did you hear?" And the prince looked back at the king and said, "I heard the cuckoos sing. I heard the leaves rustle. I heard the wind blowing. I heard the crickets chirping. I heard the grass blowing. I heard the bees buzzing." And the king was listening to him, looking unhappy. And he looked straight back at the prince. And he said, "I want you to go back to the Mingli forest for 1 more year, because I want you to again listen, because there are many more things that you did not pick up on." The prince was baffled. What more sounds could there be? He heard everything. He described everything, but he went back. And for that next year, the prince was listening carefully. and he heard the same sounds. He couldn't understand what is it he was missing. And then one fine day, it dawned on him. And he opened his ears and he began hearing things that he had never heard before. Inspired, enthused, feeling uplifted, he came back and the king asked him, "Now tell me, what did you hear?" And he said, "I heard the cuckoos chirping. I heard the wind blowing. I heard the grass. I heard the leaves rustling." He mentioned all the same things. And then the king looked at him and said, "But did you not hear anything more?" And then the prince looked back at him and said, "Yes, when I listened more carefully, then I began to hear the sound of the flowers opening. I began to hear the sound of the grass drinking up the morning dew. I began to hear the sound of the sun warming the earth." And the king was beaming. And he said, "Now you have learnt the art of how to hear the unheard. And therefore, you are qualified to be a ruler." This ability to hear the unheard, the king said to him, is a necessary, indispensable element of being a good ruler. You need to hear the hearts of the people. You need to hear their feelings which are uncommunicated. You need to hear the pains that they have not expressed to you. You need to understand the complaints that they may not have verbalized. And when you hear all of these unheard things, then when you speak to them, you can inspire confidence in them in such a way that they will want to hear from you. The king looked at the prince and said, "The demise of the state comes when leaders only listen to superficial words and don't deeply penetrate into the souls of the people to hear their true opinions, feelings, and desires." It's a beautiful story and it's a beautiful principle, because if we actually want to reach people, then we need to be able to hear the unheard. Otherwise, we won't be relevant, we won't be powerful, and we won't be transformative. So much of our teaching is about learning our content. But there's a huge amount of teaching which is learning how to communicate that content and how to package that content and how to deliver that content so it meets the needs, interests, concerns, emotions, and addresses the blocks within people. And how do we hear the unheard? Someone may say, is unheard, is not available to my ears. How will I be able to perceive all of that? And let me share with you some things that may help you as a teacher to learn to hear the unheard. The first thing is converse with your audience. Oftentimes in sessions, we do interactive exercises. And we think the purpose of the interactive exercise is to keep the crowd engaged, to keep them energized. We may think the purpose of the interactive exercise is to help them understand something better within themselves. But let me also share with you that interactive exercises and different techniques that you can engage audiences with, a large part of it is so that you as a teacher or us as preachers can actually understand our audience better. We can hear the unheard, because then when we speak, we will be much more relevant because we'll understand what's actually really going on in their lives. Not only do we converse with our immediate audience, but we should, as teachers, I feel, converse with people in general. Every teacher should have their fingers on the pulse. Like now I'm here and we're on a retreat. It's the first retreat after a long time. And we're here with 70 devotees over a weekend talking about Saranagati or surrender. And I have to share with you that one of the most important parts of the retreat is prasadam time, when I sit down with the devotees and we just have one-to-one conversations. Because I have to share with you that it is in those conversations over prasadam that I often get 60 or 70% of my inspiration for what I'll speak about. Because in those conversations, I learn about the needs, interests, concerns, feelings, emotions, blocks that people have. For many years, I had the fortune of going out on book distribution. And I feel now that being out there on the streets and really being very close to the human story of what people are going through has helped me to be more relevant as a teacher. We need to converse with people. We need to also converse with other teachers. Other teachers have unearthed so much of the unheard. And therefore, when we ask them, what are your audiences going through? What do you feel are the blocks? What do you feel are the real needs of the devotees? And when we converse together as teachers, then we can enrich each other's understanding and really be more relevant in how we present Shastra. We need to converse with the world. There's a big world out there, and there's so many things that are going on. And the people we speak to are living in that world. And therefore, we need to understand what's going on in the world, because that is so much driving their life trajectory. And so unless we're in tune with that, then we will not be able to really communicate effectively. And we have to also converse with Krishna. As Srila Prabhupada wrote in his beautiful poem, Markine Bhagavat Dharma, he writes that, please Krishna, please you make my power of speech so that it will be suitable for their understanding. Because without your empowerment, without you making my speech suitable for their understanding, I'm powerless to do it on my own. So we must converse with Krishna. We must have good sadhana and spiritual practices. And we must pray deeply to the Super Soul that when we communicate and when we try to share the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, that we can deeply connect with the hearts and the minds of those who we speak to, so that we can really reach them. And we pray that Krishna inspires us and empowers us to hear the unheard. And so this is really what I wanted to share with you today, that as teachers, we often put a lot of focus on grasping our content. But I feel that there's so much more we can be doing to grasp the unheard elements of what our audiences are going through. And just by making that investment of time, just by being sensitive to hear the unheard and deeply understand it, our teaching and communication of Krishna consciousness can be so much more relevant, powerful, impactful, and transformative. And with those words, I will conclude, and I will hand over to Tapan Mishra Prabhu to see whether there's anything I need to respond to with regards to this. Hare Krishna.
Well, I'm not taking the handover yet. You're still. So our next question, Prabhu. So you very beautifully describe the need for a teacher to hear and pay attention to the needs and concerns, interests of the students, the participants, etc. The question is, what are the other key elements of the character of a teacher that you think a teacher must else in order to be able to deliver Shastra?
My apologies, Tapanisha Prabhu. Your last bit of your question, you froze and I missed it. So if you could just repeat it again. Sorry.
So
I would hear the unheard in this case, but I'm not trying
So the question is, what are, according to you, the essential elements of the character of a teacher? What are the other skills, if I may use for the lack of any other word? What is the attitude? What are the other things that a teacher must have to be able to deliver Shastra?
Okay. Thank you so much. I think one thing is a teacher needs to be flexible. A teacher needs to think on their feet. A teacher needs to be willing and able and empowered to adjust their presentation as may be required. Oftentimes I've been doing a class, and as I said, you have to listen to the people. And I may start with an interactive class, and when I get certain feedback on my feet, I may change my whole presentation, understanding that now I'm hearing the unheard, and there's a whole other thing that I have to address here. So I think a teacher has to always be very fluid, very flexible, very adjustable in order to really meet people. They say in order to take someone somewhere, first you have to meet them where they are. And so I think flexibility in presentation is such a huge aspect of being a teacher. And I think a precursor to being flexible is being humble and realizing that, you know what, as a teacher, I thought I heard everything, but maybe I didn't hear everything. And because I'm hearing more of what I didn't hear, I have to change. So I think there could be many, many more things, but immediately in response to your question with reference to the topic that we're talking about today, I think that a teacher has to be flexible and fluid in presentation, and underpinning that there must be a deep humility that I don't know everything, I haven't heard everything, and my presentation may not be accurate or the most powerful, and I'm ready to adapt.
Humility and submission seem to be very rare and precious commodities in the world, and they're becoming even more rare. The next question, I'm just reading it aloud because I'm not sure whether I can entirely. Conversing. I'm not free from false ego and desires. How can I converse?
Again, I missed you there, but as I understood, you said, I'm not free from ego. How can I converse? Was that the question?
That is all there is, yes. There is a second part to it, but that's what it is. And it's also in the chat, Prabhu, in the Q&A. You can look at it.
Oh, it's in the Q&A. Okay, I see. I think being free from ego it doesn't happen in a day. I don't think one day we're free of ego, one day we have ego, and another day we're free of false ego. Every day we're trying to improve. I'm sure the devotee here who has raised the question definitely has some humility, maybe underrates themselves. Work with what you have. Listen, converse. Sometimes by conversing, even when you don't feel humble, you will become humbled by learning how much people have to share with you. Sometimes we have to go and open ourselves up to dialogues and conversations that otherwise we would shy away from. And all of that develops a humility within you. So what I would say is that if someone says, I'm not humble enough to converse, then what I would say is at least begin conversing with whatever humility you can muster up. And through that process, a lot more humility will come. because it's a humbling process.
And thank you. And I think one thing that everybody could do in that is to go out on the streets and distribute Srila Prabhupada's books and try to have those conversations out there in the open on the field. And as we've seen, Sutapa Prabhu does every December marathon. He leads from the front. Sutapa Prabhu, it was a very valuable lesson that you shared with us today, very touching and very important point. Today, throughout the day, we are focusing on development of Shastric education, various initiatives we are taking. And while we are going ahead and expanding the notion of more teachers, we would really be focusing very hard also on topics such as this. What must our teachers adopt? As you very rightly described, that we may learn certain skills, but we may then try to apply them mechanically. We learn something in teachers training and we apply it mechanically. It's a good start, but it's not enough. It's not enough, as time tells. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
your time and joining us. And I hope to have your association again soon in our upcoming symposiums.